It was a brisk November morning in Washington, D.C., the kind that carried a quiet tension in the air. News vans lined the streets, microphones glistened with condensation, and the Capitol dome loomed stoically against a gray sky. Inside the National Press Club, hundreds of reporters buzzed like a hive, murmuring theories and predictions. A massive American flag hung behind a gleaming podium. Everyone knew something big was coming. They just didn't know how big. Then came the moment. The double doors swung open, and strode Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, all 6'5" of him, dressed in a navy suit that looked ready for both a diplomatic summit and a wrestling ring. His signature eyebrow raise sent a ripple of chuckles through the crowd, but his eyes were serious, focused. This wasn't a promo for a new movie. This was something else. He stepped to the podium, placed both hands firmly on either side, and looked out over the sea of faces. The room hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice calm, almost presidential. "For years, people have asked me the same question. Will you run for president?" I've laughed it off, shrugged it away. But now, I'm not laughing. Because today, I'm here to tell you, yes, I am running for president of the United States. The room erupted. Phones went up. Reporters gasped. Some stood in disbelief. Others clapped, unsure whether it was out of support or sheer shock. Johnson waited, letting the reaction breathe. Then, with perfect timing, he raised a hand. "I know what you're thinking. He's an actor, a wrestler. What does he know about politics?" He leaned forward. "But I've walked in the shoes of the working class. I've been broke. I've fought for everything I have. I've listened. I've learned. And I believe now more than ever, America needs leadership that brings people together, left, right, all of us. That's what this campaign is about. Not politics. People." The message resonated. By the end of the day, #RockTheVote was trending worldwide. What the public didn't know, however, was that this decision wasn't made lightly. It wasn't about ego, or fame, or power. It was about a night 2 years ago that had haunted him ever since, a night that changed everything. 2 years earlier. It was a quiet evening in Miami. Dwayne sat on his back patio, sipping a glass of tequila, staring out at the ocean. He had just wrapped a global press tour, and by all measures, life was perfect. Blockbusters at the box office. A thriving business empire. A loving family. But something gnawed at him. That night, a letter arrived from a fan named Maria Gutierrez, a teacher from El Paso, Texas. In it, she described the struggle of keeping her classroom afloat, of trying to inspire kids who had lost hope. She ended the letter with a line that pierced his heart. "We don't need another superhero on screen, Mr. Johnson. We need one in real life." The words stuck. He read them again and again. That same week, Dwayne took a spontaneous trip to El Paso. No cameras, no press. Just him and his security team. He visited Maria's school, met the kids, listened to their stories. He sat in the cafeteria with students who shared their dreams of becoming doctors, engineers, and leaders, but who also shared fears of being forgotten, overlooked, left behind. That trip planted the seed. He returned home different. Driven, restless. For months, he met with economists, educators, former military officers, community organizers. He didn't tell anyone what he was considering, not even his inner circle. He needed to know if there was substance behind the sentiment. And when he finally told his family, the look in his mother's eyes said it all. She didn't say, "Are you sure?" She said, "It's about time." Back at the National Press Club, Dwayne closed his speech with a promise. "This campaign isn't about me. It's about you. It's about us. It's about the idea that no matter where you come from, how you started, or how many times you've fallen, you matter. You belong. And together, we can rise. Let's build a future that reflects the strength of our people." He raised his fist, not in defiance, but in solidarity. The race for 2028 had officially begun. But what no one could predict, not his team, not his opponents, not even Dwayne himself, was just how wild, dangerous, and revolutionary this campaign trail would become. The morning after Dwayne Johnson's announcement, the political landscape trembled. Cable news ran wall-to-wall coverage. Social media platforms ignited with memes, debates, and declarations of support or skepticism. Late-night comedians had a field day, but beneath the jokes was an undercurrent of sincerity. The Rock, seriously, could win this thing. But for Dwayne, the spotlight was now the battleground. He was no longer just a symbol of aspiration. He was a contender, and contenders get tested. Within hours of his announcement, critics pounced. Celebrity stunt. He doesn't have a policy platform. He's never held public office. This is a distraction from real governance. But Dwayne was ready. Behind the scenes, a team had already been in motion for months, quietly assembling a coalition that blended political veterans with community leaders and fresh thinkers. They called themselves the Foundation. Leading the charge was Chief Strategist Alicia Monroe, a former civil rights attorney from Chicago with a reputation for dismantling corruption at the state level. Her motto: no fluff, no favors, just facts. She didn't care about Hollywood glamour. She cared about justice. Alicia's first move was to outline what the press had assumed didn't exist: a rock-solid policy platform. Education reform that prioritized federal support for underfunded public schools. A national mental health initiative aimed at veterans and first responders. Criminal justice reform centered on rehabilitation and economic reintegration. A sweeping infrastructure proposal to revitalize rural America. And, perhaps most controversially, a mandatory public service program for young adults, military, environmental, or civic. The reaction was electric. Suddenly, The Rock wasn't just a novelty. He had ideas. He had direction. He had purpose. What set Johnson's campaign apart wasn't just its message, it was its movement. Rather than focusing on big donors, Dwayne launched the People's Tour, a cross-country RV journey through 50 towns in 50 days. He visited farmers in Iowa, steelworkers in Pennsylvania, single mothers in Nevada, high school students in Atlanta. No motorcade. No security bubble. Just handshakes, real talk, and town hall meetings broadcast live to millions. One viral clip from Nebraska showed Dwayne sitting in a diner, breaking down tax reform over scrambled eggs and hash browns. "If I can't explain it to my mom, I'm not supporting it," he said. The crowd laughed, then leaned in. This was different. By week 4, his approval rating had surged among independents and even disillusioned voters from both major parties. Something was happening that DC hadn't planned for. And that scared people. At a private fundraiser in Georgetown, a group of senior political operatives, some Republican, some Democrat, gathered over bourbon and cigars. They weren't thrilled. "Johnson's a disruptor," said Senator Alan Drexler, a career lawmaker with presidential ambitions of his own. "He's untested. Unpredictable. We can't let him destabilize the process." "He's not one of us," another murmured. Exactly. Behind closed doors, the machinery of traditional politics began grinding into motion. A coordinated effort was launched to dig into Johnson's past. Lawsuits, business dealings, personal relationships. The opposition research files grew fat. Then came the leak. Just 2 days before a major rally in Detroit, an anonymous source released internal emails from Johnson's business ventures in the early 2000s. Taken out of context, the messages appeared to show unethical practices, misleading investors, exploiting licensing loopholes, even brushing off complaints from employees. The media pounced. Headlines screamed betrayal. Commentators called for accountability. Pundits asked the same question: was the people's champion just another slick operator? But Dwayne didn't run from it. At the Detroit rally, he stood in front of 40,000 people and addressed the controversy head-on. "Yes, those are real emails. Yes, they look bad. And yes, I failed in how I handled those situations. I wasn't perfect. I made mistakes. But I learned. I changed. I built better companies. I listened. And if you're looking for a perfect candidate, I'm not him. But if you're looking for someone who grows, who leads with humility, who will always tell you the truth, then I'm your guy." Silence. Then applause. Then a roar. It was the most human moment of the campaign. And it changed everything. By mid-year, a new demographic had emerged: the Rockocrats. A grassroots movement of cross-partisan voters united not by party, but by values. Transparency. Authenticity. Grit. They weren't just rallying. They were organizing. Mobilizing. Voting in record numbers during primaries and local elections, shifting the national conversation towards service, unity, and dignity. And as the political establishment scrambled to adapt, one thing became clear. Dwayne Johnson wasn't just running a campaign. He was leading a revolution. The first bullet wasn't real, not in the literal sense. It came in the form of a headline: cruel, calculated, and timed to perfection. Exposed: Dwayne Johnson's secret political mentor tied to foreign lobby. It ran on every major network by dawn. The story accused Dwayne's policy advisor, an ex-diplomat named Thomas Worth, of undisclosed meetings with foreign lobbyists over a decade ago. The headline was explosive. The evidence was thin. But in the realm of politics, perception can be more fatal than fact. Within hours, pundits framed it as a national security risk. Others whispered the word puppet. It was everything his opponents had been waiting for, a crack in the armor of invincibility. Dwayne was in Phoenix, stepping off the campaign bus, when he got the call. "Tom's out," Alicia Monroe said over the phone. Her voice was ice cold. "We're holding a press conference in 90 minutes. He stared out at the Arizona sun, jaw tight. He didn't do anything wrong. That doesn't matter right now. But to Dwayne, it did. At the podium that evening, he didn't dance around the story. He defended Tom's reputation, then pivoted hard, delivering a searing critique of the political system itself. "We talk about loyalty and character, but when the media smells blood, the first instinct is to feed the frenzy, not seek the truth. That's not leadership. That's cowardice." The crowd erupted. The press didn't know how to respond. He wasn't playing their game. He wasn't playing any game at all. He was rewriting the rules. And that's when the real bullet came. For days later, while Dwayne was greeting fans outside a rally in Charleston, South Carolina, a man broke through the barricade. He was 23, rail-thin, eyes wild. He didn't have a weapon, but he screamed something that chilled everyone who heard it. "Traitors don't belong on our soil." Secret Service tackled him to the ground, but the damage was done. The video went viral. Talking heads lit up the airwaves. "He's too polarizing. He's stirring up dangerous passion. He could spark civil unrest." In private, the campaign team gathered in a darkened room, eyes locked on a wall of screens. Alicia turned to Dwayne. "This is it. You've crossed into territory no outsiders ever survived." Dwayne looked around the room. His family, his allies, his team. "I didn't come this far to run. I came this far to stand." The words were simple, but in that room, they felt like a thunderclap. They doubled security. Every event now included snipers, drones, perimeter checks. Dwayne hated it. He wanted to be close to the people. That was the whole point. But now, people were seeing him not just as a candidate, but as a target. Despite the fear, the campaign didn't shrink. It grew. Donations surged. Crowds ballooned. And then something happened that no one expected, not even his team. He began flipping counties. Republican strongholds. Democratic urban centers. Independent suburbs. All moving in his direction. Not because of party. Because of principle. The people had decided he wasn't a gimmick. He was a mirror. And in him, they saw their best selves. But every ascent invites sabotage. Weeks before the national debate, an anonymous document was leaked to a whistleblower blog. It claimed Dwayne had falsified parts of his autobiography, exaggerating struggles, inventing poverty, lying about key moments of his youth. The campaign denied it. But the damage, once again, was done. Cable news anchors spoke in careful tones. If this is true, it calls into question the foundation of his entire persona. Dwayne didn't respond immediately. He waited. Then, on the night of the first debate, he walked into the arena in Houston, Texas, and addressed it live. No teleprompter. No script. "Just me and you," he said, staring straight into the camera. "I've told my story the way I lived it. If someone wants to go back in time and dig through every detail of my life, go for it. I've got nothing to hide. My truth is on every scar I carry." He paused, took a breath. "And if the worst thing you can say about me is that I wanted my life to mean something more to the people watching, then I can live with that." The audience stood. His opponents didn't know whether to attack or applaud. But behind the applause, something darker was stirring. In Washington, in corporate boardrooms, in foreign capitals, Dwayne Johnson's rise wasn't viewed as inspiring. It was viewed as dangerous, uncontrollable. Plans began to form. Anonymous PACs funded attack ads at record speed. Social media accounts flooded platforms with conspiracy theories, tying Dwayne to secret societies, global plots, even suggesting he was an AI-created figurehead. None of it stuck, but all of it chipped away. And then, one night, a black SUV pulled up outside Dwayne's campaign headquarters in LA. Inside was a man in a tailored gray suit. No name, no introduction, just a message. "Back out now," he said. "While you still have something left to protect." Dwayne didn't flinch. "I'm not going anywhere." The man smiled, not with joy, but with pity. "We'll see." The next morning, Johnson's private security detail found a note taped to his daughter's school locker. "Champions fall harder." It wasn't just a campaign anymore. It was war. The days that followed blurred into one another. It was as if the country had been split down the middle, not along party lines, but down a new fault line no pollster could chart. On one side stood those who believed Dwayne Johnson represented a new American covenant, truth over party, action over rhetoric, character over pedigree. On the other, a coalition of entrenched powers, political, financial, foreign, who saw him as a threat to the very fabric they'd woven over generations. The threats became routine. Anonymous texts, cryptic emails, a drone found hovering over his daughter's soccer practice. The campaign headquarters had to move twice in 1 month. The Rock was now surrounded by layers of private security and federal protection, but he refused to hide. He kept showing up. Every handshake, every town hall, every sunrise rally with veterans, farmers, teachers. He showed up when no camera crews were there, sometimes only to speak with 10 people at a library basement in Kansas. They'd ask him why he was still doing it. And every time, the answer was the same. Because if I stop showing up, they win. In mid-September, something changed. A new kind of attack emerged, more calculated, more personal. A major media outlet published a damning expose alleging that Johnson's father, Rocky Johnson, had received hush money decades earlier to conceal an extramarital affair with a prominent politician's wife. The piece was brutal. It painted a portrait of a legacy built on deception, implying that Dwayne's entire rise was underpinned by buried scandal. The timing couldn't have been worse. He was 1 week out from the national televised town hall, and the public was reeling from scandal fatigue. That night, Dwayne sat alone in his campaign bus, holding the article in one hand and a photo of his father in the other. His father had been dead for years. Couldn't defend himself. Couldn't explain. Couldn't deny. It wasn't just an attack on legacy, it was an attack on memory. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, in front of a packed Union Hall in Pittsburgh, Dwayne walked on stage with no script. I've always told you I'd never run from anything. And I'm not starting today. There's an article going around that attacks my father. A man who lived hard, loved hard, and never pretended to be perfect. Did he make mistakes? Yeah. Did I know everything about him? No. But I loved him. And I still do. He paused, letting the words sink in. We can tear each other apart forever, digging up every failure, every mistake, every human flaw. But that's not leadership. That's not America. We're better than that. I believe we still are. There was no applause at first, just silence. And then, slowly, a standing ovation that lasted nearly 3 minutes. That moment became the most replayed political clip of the year. But success has gravity, and gravity attracts enemies. The opposition began to coalesce around a single candidate, a former governor named Richard Halden, a polished, ruthless operator with connections in every dark corner of the Capitol. Halden didn't go after Dwayne publicly. He didn't have to. He worked through proxies, super PACs, think tanks, anonymous sources. His strategy was death by 1,000 cuts. And it was working. Polls tightened. Donations plateaued. The momentum wavered. Inside Johnson's campaign headquarters, Alicia Monroe called an emergency meeting. If we keep playing defense, we lose, she said flatly. They're baiting us with scandal while they mobilize the machine. We need to pivot. To what? Someone asked. We can't outfund them. We can't outsmear them. Alicia turned to Dwayne. We outbelieve them. You go straight to the people. One final push. One final stand. You look America in the eye, and you remind them why they believed in you in the first place. What followed became known as the Final March. Dwayne Johnson, accompanied by his team and thousands of volunteers, launched a 30-day, 30-state tour, by bus, by foot, by any means necessary. No stadiums. No flashing lights. Just street corners, school gyms, church parking lots, wherever people gathered. He listened. He spoke. He cried. In Alabama, he walked through tornado-ravaged neighborhoods with residents still living in tents. In Chicago, he met with single fathers rebuilding their lives after incarceration. In Oregon, he stood on tribal land with leaders who hadn't had a federal visitor in over a decade. One night, in New Mexico, he gave his speech in Spanish, broken, but sincere. His team advised against it, fearing backlash. He did it anyway. By the time the march reached Washington, D.C., the crowd had grown into the tens of thousands. He stood on the National Mall, beneath the shadow of Lincoln's statue, and made one final vow. I'm not asking you to vote for a celebrity. I'm asking you to vote for someone who has bled, lost, learned, and refused to quit. I don't care if you're left or right. I care if you believe this country still belongs to its people. He raised his hand, not in a fist, but in an open palm. An invitation. A pledge. Behind him, the polls still told a tight story. Halden was ahead by 2 points in key battleground states. The media kept warning of a late collapse. But something was shifting beneath the surface, something the numbers couldn't track. A movement was no longer an idea. It had become a force, and the system wasn't ready for what came next. Election day arrived with a kind of silence America hadn't heard in years. A heavy, electric quiet, the kind that hangs before a storm. Streets across the country filled not with shouting, but with footsteps. People moved with purpose. No last-minute riots. No last-minute rallies. Just millions of Americans stepping into polling places like churches, carrying not just opinions, but something rarer: hope. The final weeks of Dwayne Johnson's campaign hadn't been defined by flashy speeches or tactical attacks. Instead, they had been marked by presence. Everywhere he went, he listened first, spoke second. He didn't promise miracles. He promised effort, integrity, service. His slogan, once mocked, now echoed like an oath on ballot lines from Georgia to Michigan: build forward, together. That evening, as the sun set over Los Angeles, Dwayne sat with his family in the living room of a modest campaign lodge, far from the lights of his Hollywood mansion. No media, no staff, just a television screen, some homemade food, and a sense that something irreversible had already occurred, regardless of the numbers. The first results trickled in. Florida, too close to call. Texas, Halden. California, Johnson. Ohio, Halden, by less than 0.8%. Pennsylvania, leaning Johnson. It was going to be close. Painfully close. In a windowless war room back in D.C., Alicia Monroe sat at the head of a long conference table, surrounded by maps, monitors, analysts. She wasn't nervous. She was focused. "This isn't just about the numbers," she said to the team. "It's about turnout in communities the polls never respected. If our people show up, we win. Period." And they did. Turnout in rural counties, many of them traditionally conservative, broke records. Suburbs, especially among first-time voters, leaned hard toward Johnson. In cities, working-class districts that hadn't felt heard in a generation turned out in droves. By midnight, the map looked like a battlefield, scattered, volatile, but shifting. And then it happened. Wisconsin flipped. Arizona flipped. Georgia flipped. By 2:47 a.m. Eastern Time, CNN's John King tapped the final county on his touchscreen map and stepped back, stunned. "And there it is," he said quietly. "Ladies and gentlemen, Dwayne Johnson has been elected the 47th President of the United States." Across the country, something strange happened. There were no fireworks, no mobs, no mass parades or riots, just a moment of stunned silence. And then, like a quiet breeze through dry fields, came tears. Smiles. People embracing in cafes, at gas stations, on street corners. Not because they thought Dwayne would fix everything, but because, for the first time in a long time, they believed the system might still be theirs. The victory speech was brief. It wasn't held in a stadium or on a polished stage, but on the steps of a community center in Delaware where Johnson had once filmed a charity PSA. "I stand here not as a Democrat, not as a Republican, but as your public servant," he said. "And I will serve with the strength of my convictions and the humility of my mistakes." He looked out over the sea of people, all lit by nothing but floodlights and phone screens. "We didn't win because we shouted the loudest. We won because we listened the deepest. Now, the work begins." The transition was smooth. Halden, to his credit, conceded quickly and met with Johnson in private. No one knows exactly what they said. But later, as Halden walked out of the meeting, a reporter asked if he thought America had made a mistake. He paused, then said, "No, I think we just got reminded what this country was supposed to be." On January 20th, 2029, Dwayne Johnson placed his hand on the Bible once held by Abraham Lincoln and took the oath of office. "I, Dwayne Douglas Johnson, do solemnly swear." It was the quietest inauguration in modern memory. No celebrity performances. No special guests flown in from Hollywood. Just thousands of everyday Americans on the National Mall, wrapped in coats and blankets, holding their breath. As he finished the oath, he didn't pump a fist or wave to the crowd. He simply nodded, turned to the Capitol, and walked through the doors to begin his first day of work. Epilogue. In the years that followed, the Johnson presidency would be studied in history classes not for its perfection, but for its pivot. It wasn't a utopia. There were hard years. Mistakes. fights. But there was also something else. A culture of decency, a commitment to service, a revival of belief that character matters more than credentials and heart more than heritage. He never stopped visiting schools, never stopped answering letters, never stopped asking, "What do you need from me?" And whenever someone asked how he did it, how a wrestler turned actor turned president changed the course of a nation, he'd always smile and say, "By listening to the people who never got a mic."